My name is Charles Sferra. We're going to interview you on, this is going to be an oral history record from a veteran. And this is a project put forth by the Library of Congress. What we're doing is, in previous wars, we never had the opportunity to interview the veterans because we never had the technology. Now we do. And I'd like to proceed, and I'm quite sure you had a very interesting tenure in the service. Where were you born, and what town where did you come from, Jim?
Actually, I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and it was in 1926, April 9th, 1926. And when World War II started, I was with a friend of mine, Jerry Calder, in a movie theater, the Lefferts Theater, and they stopped the movie, and they said that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. And I looked at Jerry, and Jerry looked at me, and we said, "Where's Pearl Harbor?" We didn't know where Pearl Harbor was. And that night on the way home, I think I was 15 at the time, and he was 16 or 17, and we're looking up the sky, looking for paratroopers. This is the imagination that young boys had. We didn't know what was going on. We got home, and Jerry went back to school, and I left school. My mother was a single mother, and I went down to Norfolk, Virginia. This friend, actually, person my mother was keeping company with, worked in Norfolk, Virginia, and I went down to Norfolk to actually work at a floor covering company that put flooring into gun mounts, did housing for war workers. And while I was down there, I had a disagreement with this friend of my mother's, whom she eventually married, and I moved out. I moved into a house with a fellow that I worked with and his wife, young couple. And while I was there, her brother, who was in the Merchant Marine, came home. I didn't know what the Merchant Marine was. I thought they were Marines. I had no idea what they were. I got to talking with her brother, and he said, "Why don't you ship out with us?" I said, "Ship out? What is it?" He says, "I'll take you aboard the ship." So he brought me aboard the ship, and I was 15 at the time. And I was looking at the ship, and I'm on the ship, and I said, "Gee, this is great." And the captain came by, and he asked this seaman who I was. And he said, "Well, this young man might ship out with us." The captain looked at me. I must have looked like 10 years old. And he said, "Get the hell out of here. Go home." So I did leave the ship, and I went back to work, but I kept thinking about the Merchant Marine. Now, I'm a lucky man, probably one of the luckiest people around. That ship was sunk. I have heard mixed reviews about her brother. He was killed, he went insane, and I understand he was with convoy PQ-17. I didn't know what PQ-17 or anything else was at the time, but it seems that 33 ships went out to Murmansk, Russia, and 11 got through. 22 was sunk. And on the way back, I think 3 or 4 of those ships were sunk. And her brother was on one of the ships that was sunk. I then decided to go into the Merchant Marine. When I heard this, we were very patriotic at that time. And I went up to this office and I asked if I could join the Merchant Marine. That was in early '43, and they said I was too young. So I said, how old do I have to be? And they said 17 and I think a half. 17 anyway, in that area. And I went back, and I was determined to join the Merchant Marine. So I falsified my baptismal papers and made me a year older. And I still had to have a parent sign, and my mother wouldn't have signed me in. So I gave this fellow $10 to sign me in as my father. Now, my mother thought I was working in Virginia, and John thought I had gone back to New York. So they're talking on the phone one day, and my mother says to John, "How's Jim?" John says to my mother, "Yeah, how is Jim?" "Well, he's in New York." "No, he's in Virginia." They didn't know where I was. I was actually at Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn training. My mother didn't know where I was for about a month or so, because they needed seamen so badly in the Merchant Marine, because the ships were being sunk so rapidly, and they were losing a lot of seamen. Well, to make a long story short, I called my mother when my ship was ready to ship out. We had come from New York down to Norfolk, Virginia to meet up with a convoy. And I called my mom and I said, "Mom," she started to cry right away. And I said, "Mom, I'm in the Merchant Marine." She said, "What's the Merchant Marine?" I said, "Well," then I explained to her. And I said, "Look, Mom, tonight's my last night ashore. I won't be ashore anymore, so I won't be able to talk to you." She said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I don't know." "When will you be back?" "I don't know, Mom." And I said, "I can't call you or talk to you anymore till I get back." So anyway, that was the end of my conversation with my mother, who was in tears. My, the ship did pull out, and we met up with the Navy Armed Guard, of course. They were the Navy on the ship to protect us, and the merchant sailors. And our first night out, I believe it was our first night, we had a sub come up in the middle of the convoy, and we all ran to, actually, the lifeboats, because the Merchant Marine hadn't been assigned their battle stations yet. And the Merchant Marine's battle stations was actually to pass ammunition to the Navy Armed Guard. We stayed there for a while. I never did see the sub, but they said it had surfaced in the middle of the convoy, and they couldn't shoot at it because the shells would have hit other ships. They must have been desperate for air to come up. Well, anyway, we went across the Atlantic. Our destination was India. And on the way over, there were a couple of sub-attacks on the convoy and the Navy destroyers, and we had some Canadian corvettes that would be dropping depth charges. And it's a scary feeling, not knowing what war is all about. And I was just frightened, as everyone was on the ship. Now, I was on watch this one night at the bow of the ship, and I was on a Liberty ship, and this armed guard young man was on watching the gun turret above me. We were watching lookouts, and we saw what we thought were torpedoes coming at the bow of the ship. There were phosphorescent streaks coming right at the bow. He saw them and I saw them at the same time. We could hardly talk into our microphones to alert the bridge, and we realized they were porpoises, but we were very, very frightened. We thought we would be dead at that time, because if it hit, we both would have been killed. We, as I said, we did have a few sub-attacks, and we were in what they called Coffin Corner. Actually, we were next to Coffin Corner. It's the corner of the convoy where the last ship in the corner, and that's where the subs usually tried to hit those ships. If they dropped out, they tried to hit stragglers or the ones in Coffin Corner. We went through Straits of Gibraltar into the Mediterranean, and we had an air attack on the convoy. It was dusk, really. I remember it being at night, and the destroyers circled us, putting smoke down, and we were at our gun stations. At this time, we knew what we had to do. We were loaders, and the air attack was over. Bombs were dropped. Some of the ships were hit. Our ship wasn't hit. We continued through the Straits. I don't know why we went through the Straits of Messina, I guess to drop off ships, because that wasn't our destination. That's where the air attack happened, actually. We then went into Egypt, and we stayed there a short time, and then went through the Suez Canal into the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea and Indian Ocean. Now, we had a few sub-attacks on the way through the Arabian Sea, and our escorts again were great, and I started to admire the Navy when they were putting down the smoke to protect us from the bombers, and when they were going out dropping depth charges. We went into Ceylon and Sri Lanka. Oh, I did get hit with a piece of shrapnel, I forgot. It wasn't a bad wound. It hit me in the hand, and actually I bit it out. It was hot, and there was blood all over the place. And this seaman, able-bodied seaman that was near me, said, "What are you, a baby?" I remember those words to this day. He said, "It's not bad." So I took the handkerchief out and I wrapped it up, and that was it. See, the Merchant Marine didn't give medals for wounds at that time. But again, it wasn't a bad wound. I remember biting it out, spitting it out, and, well, we took care of it ourselves. I got into Sri Lanka. It was Ceylon at that time, Colombo, Ceylon. We anchored out, and then we went into India, Calcutta, India, and we went up the Hooghly River, the dirtiest, blackest, the brownest river in the world that I remember. We got into Calcutta, and I remember our ship had pulled in, and we docked, and we went into town to the Grand Hotel in Calcutta, and people over there, they had what they called elephantitis. They seemed to maim themselves to be professional beggars. This is the first that I had seen of anything like this, and the young fellows on the ship with me. That night, we came back to the ship, and we went to sleep, and unbeknown to us, during the night, they took the ship out of that one dock and put it around to the other side. So the next night, we wanted to go to town. We knew we got on a bus to go to town to the right. So that next evening after work, we got on a bus that was going to the right, but we were going in the wrong direction. this young merchant seaman and myself took the bus, and no one understood English. We got out and we realized we're going in the wrong direction. Nothing looked familiar. We got off the bus, and this rickshaw was available, and we got on the rickshaw, and this fellow, again, didn't understand English. We were going deeper and deeper into the jungle, and we didn't know it, where we were at all. In fact, I remember seeing these fires in the middle of a town. There were huts, there were no houses, and we were frightened because we had heard that the Japanese had infiltrated this area and they were killing any soldier or sailor that they saw. We finally, we walked, we ran, we did everything to try and get back, and we came to the Hooghly River, and we, believe it or not, got on a rowboat, and we rowed out to one of the ships out in the anchored out, and we asked the fellow, "Where is Calcutta?" He says, "You're going in the wrong direction." He said, "Go over to this plant." There was some sort of an iron plant there that there were men working, and we went over there, and they had Indian Army troops there, and they said they would take us back by jeep to the hotel. We went back, and that was a scary experience. But our ship pulled out. I remember we took on ballast of copra, and we came back and stopped at Bombay on the way back, and I think we had one sub-attack on the way back. Yeah, that was one sub-attack on the way back. We went through the Arabian Sea, up through the Suez Canal into the Mediterranean, and we went across the Atlantic. We had one more sub-attack in the Atlantic, I believe it was. We had about 5 or 6 sub-attacks total, one air attack. And this one day, this fellow was in the engine room, and they were dropping depth charges around us, and he came screaming up to he thought we were hit. And it must make such a loud noise down below in the engine room, and this fellow knows that when the torpedoes hit, they usually aim for the engine room, and most of your deaths in the merchant marine started with the men in the engine room. We made our trip back to New York, and I had determined that I was joining the Navy. We got home. I joined the United States Navy. I went up to Sampson, New York for my boot training, and after boot training, we went by a troop train down to Norfolk, Virginia. It was a ship that I was assigned to a light cruiser, and I remember we were on the dirtiest railroad in the world. It was filthy, dirty, and we went at night. Troop trains usually went through the big towns at night, and I remember going through New York at night, and finally we arrived in Norfolk, Virginia. We were assigned to a brand new ship, and my mother lived in Norfolk, so I saw my mother, and she came aboard the ship, and she saw where I was going to sleep, and my stepsister, John's daughter, came aboard, and she saw where I was going to sleep, my battle station, and my mom was a little sad. She realized that we were going in harm's way. Our ship then went up to Newport, Rhode Island. Actually, we went on a shakedown cruise down to Cuba, Guantanamo Bay, and on the way back, we hit a hurricane, and we had an experimental radar system that was very heavy, and our ship went over so far they thought it was going to capsize. When we got back, they took that radar off the ship and put a different type on. It was too heavy for the ship. We went up to Newport, Rhode Island as a training ship for a short time, and then we were shipped out to the Pacific. We went through the Panama Canal to Hawaii and into the Pacific. On the way over to the Pacific, we would bombard different bypassed islands. We thought it was just gunnery practice. We found out later that they were bypassed islands that the Japanese were just left to wither on the vine. And we actually became part of the 3rd Fleet and the 5th Fleet. We were assigned to protect the carriers, the aircraft carriers. We first went into Iwo Jima, and we remember the guards, we had Marines on the ship, and they were walking the deck because the Japanese swimmers were swimming out and trying to attach demolition charges to the ship, and sometimes they sneak aboard and kill some of the guards and people on board. We then went from there to Okinawa, and at Okinawa, it was probably, I know it was, not probably, it was the worst battle the Navy has ever fought. We lost 35 ships sunk. We had over 300 damaged, and we had 5,000 Navy men killed. That was the only, I think, time that the Navy lost more than the Marines. The Navy took an awful beating from the kamikaze planes. The planes would come in and make their dives. And the dives often took a lot of lives. I know that one of the carriers was hit. In fact, I brought a list with me. I think it's of the ships that were hit. Some of the ships. There's that folder over there. Just give me that. Thank you. Just to give you an idea, and this is just while we were there, and we weren't there the whole action. On April 27th, the Wichita, USS Wichita was, and plus 3 destroyers and 1 fast transport was damaged. April 27th again, USS Hutchinson suicide boat damaged. April 27th, Ralph Tabbert damaged, 14 dead. April 27th, Rathburn, Wichita, Butler, Forest damage. April 27th, Bozeman, Victory, sunk. April 28th, Bennington, Daly, Twiggs, Wadsworth, Brown. Pinky damaged. April 28th, hospital ship Comfort damaged, 34 dead. Haggard, 13 dead. April 29th, Hazelwood, 77 dead. Shannon, Benin damaged, LCS sunk. April 29th, 2 destroyers, 3 minesweepers damaged. Canadian Victory sunk. April 30th, 1 destroyer damaged, and the S. Hall Young damaged. May 1st, LST 884 damaged, and the Terror was damaged, 41 dead. May 3rd, 1945, 3 destroyers sunk. USS Birmingham, 51 dead. May 3rd, Little, 60 dead. Aaron Ward, 41 dead. LSM 195, 8 dead. May 3rd, Malcolm, 7 dead. LCS, 3 dead. Intrepid, damaged, 9 dead. May 4th, 14 small ships sunk. USS Sagamore, 1 destroyer damaged. May 4th, loose, sunk, 149 dead. Morrison, 158 dead. Shea, 35 dead. May 4th, Sangamon, 35 dead. LSM, PGM, sunk, plus 12 ships damaged. May 8th, St. George damaged. LCT, sunk. May 11th, USS Bunker Hill damaged, 400 dead. These are just some of the ships. I mention those because they should be mentioned. Okinawa was a terrible, terrible place, and I didn't see the most of it. I saw some of it, and the hardest part was seeing the bodies being dropped over the side. That was the toughest part. Our ship was damaged off Okinawa, and we went to Guam for repairs. And while I was in Guam, I knew my buddy Jerry Calder, who I was with the day World War II started. He was with the B-29s, and I asked permission to go ashore, and they said only to see relatives. So I told them Jerry was my cousin, and they let me ashore. I went, I believe it was Grand Army Field in Guam, and I got to the field, and I went to the first Quonset hut, and I asked for Jerry Calder. They didn't know him. They said, how long was he here? I said, I believe he's been here since the beginning. And they said, he's probably dead. I went to the second Quonset hut, the third, fourth. I kept going. It was funny. It wasn't funny at the time, but the last Quonset hut I went to, now you got to remember Jerry. He never swore, never smoked. His brother became a priest. I mean, we were just buddies. And I saw this fella playing ping pong, a beard, smoking, swearing, and I looked at him. It was Jerry. Now, Jerry was making raids over Japan with the B-29s, and I was so happy to see him, and he was happy to see me. I asked him if he could come back to the ship, and he got permission to come back to the ship because his next raid was off a while. And I spoke to Jerry for a while. He slept on the ship, in fact, for a couple of hours. And then he went back, and then our ship was repaired, and we had to go back into action. Now, I am the luckiest guy alive because I traced the route of the Indianapolis when she was sunk. Now, remember, we were damaged coming from Okinawa to Guam for repairs. I remember coming over, Pittsburgh, it was damaged in a storm, and it took 104 foot of a bow, tore it off. Our ship had 3-foot ripples in the deck. So our captain, actually he swung the stern into the storm, I understand, and helped save the ship. But we were taking water in the bow, and they asked for skinny guys. And I was skinny at the time, believe it or not. And I went into the hatch. They had suction hoses down into the compartments to keep the flooding, but debris was going about what they call a rose box. It's a screen that they keep in front of the, excuse me, in this front of the suction so it doesn't clog up. Now, we had to dive down, and they only had an escape hatch, very small escape hatch, with 2 6-inch suction hoses down there. And we had to slip in and dive under and take the debris out from the rose boxes and put it up on deck. Now the officer in charge said, if the bow breaks off, you realize that you guys are in trouble. We said yes. Of course, at our age, we figured nothing's going to happen to us. It's always the other guy. We kept that up. There was 6 of us, I think. I think Ivan Michael Green, a buddy in the Navy, and myself were diving down. And he said, if the Jap planes come back, you know, you could have a problem also. And he was going to put us in for a medal, but it was something we weren't interested in at the time. But why I say we're so lucky is that that trip from Okinawa to Guam, we traced the U-boat, not the U-boat, but the Japanese submarine, and it was right in our area. Had it seen us, we might have been the second Indianapolis, because we had no defenses at all at that time. We went back to Japan, and we went back to Okinawa, and they had secured Okinawa at that time, and then we were off to Japan. We were ready for the invasion of Japan. We would go in with the carriers, and they would let the planes off. They'd take off, go in and do their bombing raids. And I remember always seeing Mount Fujiyama, what a beautiful sight it was in the morning, sun glistening. And then we'd go out while the planes did their job, and then we'd come back in to pick them up. That went on for a while, and we kept that up for quite a while. We were going up and down the coast, and then we heard that the Japanese had sent some kamikazes out, and we were on alert. We were looking for the planes, and we saw our planes coming in. Little did we know that one of the Japanese planes was sneaking in with our planes. And he started to make a dive on the Hornet, to carry a Hornet. And I had binoculars, and I was looking at this plane, and they put up such a terrible fire that the Japanese plane veered off and started to come for our ship. The plane kept coming, and I just was glued to the binoculars. I couldn't take my eyes off the plane. And it kept coming, and then finally it was shot down by the Hornet. They saved our tail. That was the closest it crashed. I say within feet, was probably more than that, but it looked so close, especially when you're looking through binoculars. And being on deck, you know, you don't think you're going to survive. But the atom bomb was dropped soon after, and we went into Tokyo Bay. And in Tokyo Bay, they were told to put white sheets on the sides of the mountains with big guns that weren't destroyed by our planes. When we pulled into Tokyo Bay, it looked like a white mountain. They had so many guns hidden that we didn't even know they were there. And had we had that invasion, I probably wouldn't be here. I mean, it's just, and I'm no hero, believe me. I was scared most of the time. And if anybody says they're not scared, they're either crazy or lying. You gotta be frightened. One of the things I forgot to tell you before is one of our boys on the ship was hit. Part of his arm was badly mangled. I remember grabbing it because the blood was pulsating out, and he was taken off the ship after that. He was sent back to the States. I thought I'd never see him again, but the ship, when we went into Tokyo Bay and after they signed the peace treaty, we came back to the United States. We were lucky. I guess the reason was was we were damaged, and we got to go home first. But on the way home, I had 30 days recuperation leave, and they sent us by train from Seattle, Washington to New York. But we went from Seattle to Texas to Chicago to New York. But while we were in Texas, we were going through the railroad yards, and I remember it was pretty dark out. It wasn't night, but it was close to it, and this fellow with a lantern, swinging a lantern in the train yard, and he looked familiar. He was tall, thin. It was the fellow that had lost a good portion of his arm. He didn't lose his arm, but a big chunk of it was knocked out. It was him. I had bumped into him on the way home. He had been discharged, and he had gotten a job with the railroad. And the rest of my trip was, I went home. I had my 30 days recuperation leave, went back to the ship, and it had moved from Seattle to the San Pedro Naval Base in California. When I got back, they said, "You're up for discharge." So I had to make the trip back again by train. And the country was so wonderful. I mean, I remember going through these little towns, and these people would be throwing apples, oranges, drinks into the train for the troops coming home. Oh, I remember one thing. When we pulled into Seattle, I had wanted a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich and milk for the longest time, because we had run out of all food while we were over there. We had tropical butter, powdered milk, powdered eggs, and we were one of the lucky ones. Some of the guys didn't have anything. But pancakes were made so terrible. To this day, I don't eat pancakes. But after I came home, I know I'm going around in circles, but things that come to mind. I went to be discharged. I went to the west side to one of the piers, and they sent me out to Long Island, and I was discharged from Long Island. And that's the end of my story. I have nothing else to say.
Jim, was very interesting, but I'm sure this, you could see the effects that the war had made on the United States as we come up to date. I mean, you look at what it was during the Depression, you see what it was during the 40s and how it was toward the end of the 40s. What was your impression? Did you see the great changes that were brought about by the war? What were they?
Well, when we first got home, it was very tough. First of all, everybody was getting home, and I wanted a job, first of all. We have what they call a 52-20. For 52 weeks, you got $20 a week. And I put in for it, but I never did collect a dime because I got a job. And the people were wonderful. I mean, as I told you, when we were coming across the country, the people were just so great. I know my own area, my friends, I lost a lot of friends and acquaintances, really, because we used to play stickball and baseball and touch football with other blocks. Now, I was on 130th Street, and on our street we lost two dead, 4 wounded. And on 131st Street, friends, they lost about 10 young men. When you came home, they had blue stars in the window for people that were in the service, and the gold stars were for people that had lost their sons, their husbands, their fathers, and there were so many gold stars. It was not too good. But the people pulled together. I mean, there was a big change. Hopefully, this never happens again.
Jim, what I was alluding to, at the time of Pearl Harbor, I believe it was Admiral Yamamoto made the statement that he's afraid that he's woken a sleeping giant.
That is correct.
Now,
Yeah.
what did the war do to this country in a way of manufacturing? Did it put us in the forefront? How did it do it? What is your impression on it?
Well, actually, I think my impression is that the women of this country really got a boost up because all the men were going into the Army, the Navy, the Marines, the Air Force, Coast Guard, and these women filled their places. But unfortunately, when the men came home, a lot of these women who were used to working now were laid off, so the men could get their jobs back. The country, I think, was more united after the war, because before the war, as I said, I was just a kid, but I remember they didn't want our boys to go overseas, and Roosevelt said he would never send our boys overseas. But after Pearl Harbor, of course, we were so united. Everyone wanted to enlist in the Army, the Navy, or the Marines, or the Air Corps, or the Coast Guard, and the Merchant Marine, of course.
You remember what it was crossing the country by train. How was it? Was it World War II that brought about the thinking of the infrastructure for the interstate highway?
I believe that actually the highways were built during the Depression. A lot of the highways were built during the Depression, or the start of them, to keep people working. I mean, I remember being on home relief where you just didn't have any money. They didn't have unemployment insurance at that time. If you didn't have a job, it was tough eating. So many people didn't want to go on this, well, actually it's food stamps. And that happened before the war. After the war, there were so many changes that were for the better, I really can't say too much more about it.
What about the manufacturing industry in the United States, pre-war and after the war?
Well, pre-war, of course, Ford always had the assembly line, and the manufacturers of planes and cars, they had their different manufacturing lines, but actually we really got together, and we had assembly lines that no one had ever thought of or dreamed of before the war, because we had to have great manufacturing like Liberty ships. They built one, I think it was in 4 days. I mean, which would have taken a year or so earlier to build. We did so many things that people didn't believe we could do. Actually, World War II, well, I remember when I got my first job down in Norfolk, Virginia, I was making $30 a week. And everything was very tough at that time. After the war, we started to improve. When I got home, I went to work, and I started with $50 a week. That was unheard of, $50 a week. I went to work for a carpet company, sweeping the floor. And it had to be something great, because I ended up owning the company after many, many years. But I don't know whether that could have been done before World War II. The manufacturing of foods, planes, cars, was so great after the war that there must have been some advantages from the war, really, in production. We learned how to work together, and it was just, hold it 1 second, shut it off. Sorry for the break, but we are on a safety patrol on Lake Mayapack, and we had a boat that needed our assistance. There were 5 people aboard. Is that right, Dick? 5?
6.
6 people aboard, and they were being towed by a police jet ski, personal watercraft, and actually the line was very, very thin, and there were people in line, so if it broke, it would take their heads off. So we took them in tow with a heavier line and removed the people from the bow, told them to get out of the line, way of the line if it should break. We have been working on Lake Mayapack for the last 2 years, and this year we have had 15 assists, and last year we had about the same, but last year we pulled 4 people out of the water when their boat was swamped, and they had no PFDs, excuse me. There was 1 floating nearby. We feel that we are doing a service to the community, and thanks to the Coast Guard Auxiliary, we have gotten a lot of comments and praise from the supervisor of our town, the people from our town. They come up to us and thank us and ask us to stay on the water more than we are. But we are out here every Saturday, Sunday, and holiday, and that's about all anyone can do, including the police. They are out here usually from 1:30 on, and we're here from normally 7 o'clock in the morning, possibly 6:30 sometimes, because of the fishermen out here. We don't believe there have been any deaths since we've been on patrol on this lake, and hopefully that continues. We have worked with the children in this area, and this year we have given the Boats, Water, and Kids course to over 900 children, and I believe it was 70 teachers. Last year we did 1,200 children and many, many teachers. This is a program we want to keep up in our area and hope that all auxiliaries throughout the country work in their communities and work with the children. They bring it home to their parents. We've had parents come up to us and thank us, and the children actually ask their mom and dad to put on PFDs, life jackets. We have a lake which is kind of small. It's only about 1.5 miles, 2 miles long, and a little over 1 mile wide. And I was told that they had about 1 death a year in the past. In 1 year they had 3 deaths on the lake. It seems to be fishermen that 3 deaths. Since we're here, there have been no deaths. Hopefully we have contributed to that safety. We do talk to the people. We do tell them what they should have according to state law. We do inform them that we're not law enforcement, but it's just safety. And most of the people are thankful. I don't remember one person who has had a negative remark about our being on the lake. In fact, we were invited to the Friends of Lake Mayapack barbecue, and people came up and said, "You towed me on the lake. You assisted me on the lake. You took..." Bring it forward. Bring it forward. Bring it forward. Sorry about that. We are in a cove on Lake Mayapack, and I feel this is about the end of it. Charlie, do you have...
One statement, Jim. If you were to say something to your descendants about war and the effects of war, what advice would you give them?
Do everything in your power to prevent wars. Wars are a horrible, horrible thing. If you see a man or a woman walking by, and I say a woman because women are in combat today, and I saw a man the other day with one arm, and he was an old veteran. Now, probably when he lost his arm, he was a young boy, a young man like I was, and he's soon forgotten. Don't forget these veterans. They have made our country what it is today, and I feel that I owe them a debt of gratitude, even though I am a veteran. Some gave so much, I gave so little. These men and women are just, I don't know how to explain it. It's just a thing that we can never forget. War is hell. You do not want to see your sons or daughters go off to war. I think that should be the last of any country's options. Never go to war.
Jim, thank you very much.